The day I learned my mother had given everything to my brother, my hands were still smelling like dish soap and hospital sanitizer. I remember standing at the kitchen sink, watching gray water swirl down the drain when my phone buzzed on the counter behind me. I didn't turn around right away. I had learned, over the years, to finish one thing before starting another, because if I didn't, nothing ever really got finished. Not the bills, not the caregiving, not the quiet swallowing of my own feelings. When I finally dried my hands and picked up the phone, I saw a missed call from a number I didn't recognize. Under it, a voicemail notification. I pressed play without thinking. "Hello, this message is for Ms. Eleanor James," the woman's voice said, crisp and professional. "This is Margaret Hill from Hill and Associates. I'm calling regarding the transfer of property documents signed by your mother, Mrs. Ruth James. We need to confirm your awareness as next of kin." Next of kin. The words landed heavy in my chest, like something dropped into still water. I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the rest of the message devolve into polite legal language I couldn't quite catch. All I could hear was the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock above the stove, and my own breath turning shallow. My mother had signed property documents, and no one had told me. That was how it began, not with shouting or tears or some dramatic confrontation, just a quiet voicemail left on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon while I was washing dishes in a house I paid for with time, money, and a kind of devotion that doesn't show up on paper. Before all of this, before lawyers' voices and sealed envelopes, my life was small and steady. Hard, yes, but honest. I was the daughter who stayed. I had moved back into my childhood home 7 years earlier after my divorce. My children were grown by then, off building lives that didn't need me hovering over them anymore. When my marriage ended, I told myself I was fine. I told everyone else the same. But loneliness has a way of sneaking into your bones, especially at night when the house is too quiet and memories get loud. My mother, Ruth, had already been showing signs of slowing down. Nothing dramatic, just little things. Forgetting where she put her glasses while they were perched on her head, burning toast because she wandered out of the kitchen mid-task, complaining about her knees, her back, the way age felt like a coat she couldn't take off. "Maybe it's time you come home," she said one evening over the phone, her voice casual, like she was suggesting I visit for the weekend. "This house feels too big with just me in it." So I did. I moved back into the house I grew up in, the one with the creaky third stair and the dent in the hallway wall from where my brother once threw a baseball inside, even though he'd been told not to. I took the small bedroom at the end of the hall, the one that always smelled faintly of dust and old books. At first, it felt temporary. Just until I got back on my feet, just until Mom felt steadier. But temporary has a way of stretching itself thin until it becomes your whole life. I worked full-time at the local insurance office, a job that didn't pay much, but paid consistently. Every morning, I woke before dawn, brewed coffee strong enough to cut through sleep, and laid out my mother's pills in their little plastic organizer. Monday through Sunday, morning and night. I paid the electric bill when she forgot. I took over the grocery shopping when she started coming home with half the list missing. I sat with her through doctor's appointments, nodded politely while they spoke to me instead of her, and then repeated everything slowly on the drive home so she wouldn't feel embarrassed. I didn't resent it, not then. This was my mother, the woman who braided my hair for school, who stayed up late sewing costumes when money was tight, who once sold her wedding ring to make sure we had Christmas gifts after my father left. Caring for her felt like returning a debt I could never fully repay. My brother, Daniel, lived 3 states away. He was the golden child, the one who left, succeeded, married well. He worked in tech, wore pressed shirts even on weekends, and talked about investments and portfolios in a way that my mother's eyes lit up with pride. When he called, she sat up straighter. When he visited, she cooked meals that took all day, even when her hands shook with arthritis. "Danny's just busy," she'd always say when weeks passed without a call. "You know how important his work is." I did know. I also knew he never asked about the bills, never asked how much her prescriptions cost, never noticed when the roof started leaking or when the furnace made that worrying rattle in winter. That was my domain, quiet, unacknowledged. Once a month, I balanced her checkbook at the kitchen table, the surface worn smooth by decades of family meals. I paid what needed paying and covered the rest when her pension came up short. I told myself it didn't matter. Money comes and goes. Time is what you don't get back. And still, there were moments, small, sharp ones, that made me pause. Like the way my mother brushed off my suggestions about making a will, or how she changed the subject whenever I mentioned planning for the future, or the way she spoke about Daniel's visits as if they were acts of heroism, while my presence was treated like part of the furniture. I ignored those moments. I was good at that, because loving someone sometimes means choosing not to look too closely at the places that hurt. But standing there in the kitchen, phone in my hand, listening to a stranger talk about property transfers, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. That voicemail was the first crack, and even then I told myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. There always is, I thought. Isn't there? I didn't call the number back right away. I sat at the kitchen table instead, my phone face down beside my mug of coffee, watching the steam rise and disappear. The clock ticked loud enough to feel accusatory. Every sound in that house always felt louder when I was trying not to think. My mother was in the living room, dozing in her recliner with the afternoon news murmuring softly. Her mouth was slightly open, her chin tilted down, a position I'd gently correct when I passed so her neck wouldn't ache later. That was my instinct, to adjust, to soften, to protect. I watched her chest rise and fall and told myself the voicemail didn't mean what I thought it meant. Maybe it was paperwork for taxes. Maybe Daniel was helping her with something financial. Maybe she'd misunderstood what she was signing. My mother wasn't a schemer. She was careful, quiet, almost timid when it came to official things. She used to ask me to read every form out loud, even the simple ones, just so she wouldn't miss something important. That's why the idea of her transferring property without telling me felt wrong. Not impossible, but wrong. That evening, after dinner, meatloaf and mashed potatoes, one of the meals she still enjoyed, I brought it up gently. "Mom," I said, rinsing plates at the sink, "did you talk to a lawyer recently?" She didn't look up from the crossword puzzle in her lap. "A lawyer? No, why would I do that?" I shrugged, keeping my tone light. "Just wondered. I got a strange voicemail today, something about documents." Her pencil paused mid-word, just for a moment. "Oh," she said too quickly. "That." I turned around then. "That?" She waved a hand as if swatting a fly. "It's nothing you need to worry about, Ellie." I hadn't heard her call me that, Ellie, in years. She usually used my full name when she was trying to assert authority. The nickname felt like a distraction. "What kind of documents?" I asked. She sighed, the sound weary, rehearsed. "Danny wanted to help me get things in order. You know how he is, always thinking ahead." My stomach tightened. "Get what in order?" She finally looked at me then, her eyes sharp despite her age. "I'm still perfectly capable of making my own decisions." "I know that," I said quickly. "I'm not saying you aren't. It's handled," she said, cutting me off. "You do enough already. I didn't want to burden you with more." Burden. The word hung between us, heavy and unfair. I dried my hands slowly, choosing my next words like stepping stones across a river. Mom, when things involve the house or finances, I should probably know, since I'm the one paying the bills. Her lips pressed into a thin line. That was your choice. I felt that one land, sharp and clean. I never asked you to do that, she continued, and I've always appreciated it. But this is separate. Separate how? I asked. She folded the crossword puzzle with a little snap. It's just paperwork. Danny thought it would be easier this way. Easier for whom? I wondered. But I didn't push. I never pushed. I'd learned long ago that pushing my mother only made her retreat further into herself, into silence that could last days. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan, listening to it whir softly. My thoughts circled the same question over and over. What exactly did she sign? The next few weeks passed in a strange haze. Life continued, doctor appointments, grocery runs, late nights balancing accounts, but something had shifted. Conversations felt thinner. My mother guarded her phone, stepping into the hallway when Daniel called. When I entered the room, she'd lower her voice or end the call altogether. Once I heard her say, "Yes, he's taking care of it," and something inside me went very still. The voicemail replayed in my head at odd moments. Transfer of property documents. I finally called the number back one morning while my mother was at physical therapy. Margaret Hill answered, her voice just as professional as before. "I'm calling about the message you left regarding my mother, Ruth James." There was a brief pause as she pulled up the file. I could hear typing on the other end. "Yes," she said. "Mrs. James recently executed a quitclaim deed transferring ownership of her primary residence to her son, Daniel James." The words felt unreal, like they were spoken underwater. "I'm sorry, transferring ownership?" "Yes, the property is now legally in his name. Mrs. James retained a life estate, meaning she has the right to live in the home for the duration of her life." I sat down hard in the kitchen chair. And me?" I asked. "I live there. I've been caring for her." Another pause, this one longer. "You are not listed on the deed, Miss James." The room seemed to tilt. Did she leave anything to me? "I can't discuss the contents of her will without authorization," Margaret said gently, "but I can tell you that the property transfer was finalized last month." Last month? I thought of all the moments I'd spent that month, paying the water bill, replacing a broken window, sitting by my mother's bedside during a bad flu, all while the house beneath my feet was quietly signed away. "I see," I said, though I didn't. When I hung up, I stayed seated for a long time, staring at the worn grain of the table. I traced the same scratch I'd traced 1,000 times before, a mark left by a childhood accident I'd never quite owned up to. I didn't cry, not yet. Shock has a way of numbing you, wrapping your heart in cotton so the pain comes later. That evening, when my mother came home, I was waiting in the living room. The house felt different, like it no longer belonged to me, even though it never truly had. "Mom," I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised me, "we need to talk." She sighed, already tired. "Can it wait? I'm exhausted." "No, it can't." She sat down slowly, smoothing her skirt. She didn't look at me. "I spoke to a lawyer today about the house." Her shoulders stiffened. "You signed it over to Daniel, the whole house." She closed her eyes. "I knew you'd make a fuss." "A fuss?" My voice cracked despite my effort. "I've lived here for 7 years. I've paid for almost everything, and you didn't think I deserved to know?" She opened her eyes then, and there was something defensive there, something old. Daniel needs security, she said. He has a family. And I don't? I asked. She looked away. That silence, that small, dismissive silence, hurt more than any raised voice ever could. I wasn't trying to hurt you, she said finally. I just did what I thought was best. For who? I asked. She didn't answer. And in that moment, sitting across from the woman I'd built my life around, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. Love, when mixed with favoritism, can become a quiet kind of betrayal. And the worst part? It always wears the face of good intentions. After that conversation, the house fell into a silence that felt heavier than any argument. My mother moved through the rooms like a guest, careful and reserved. She thanked me more often, for meals, for rides, for small things she'd never acknowledged before. The politeness felt wrong, like distance dressed up as gratitude. I didn't know how to exist in that space anymore. At night, I lay awake listening to the old house settle, every creak sounding like a reminder that the walls around me no longer belonged to the story I thought I was living. I'd spent years believing we were building something together, some unspoken agreement rooted in loyalty and care. Now I realized I'd been building alone. Still, I kept going. That's what people like me do. We keep going even when the ground shifts under our feet. I took my mother to her appointments. I cooked. I cleaned. I smiled when neighbors asked how she was doing. But inside, a quiet reckoning had begun. Questions I'd buried for years were starting to surface, sharp and insistent. Had I always been the responsible one because I wanted to be, or because no one else would? Had my mother leaned on me out of trust or convenience? And most painful of all, had Daniel always been the center of her future while I was just maintaining the present? The first time I spoke to my brother after the discovery, it was by accident. He called one evening while I was folding laundry in the living room. My mother's phone buzzed on the side table. She looked at the screen, then at me, her eyes flickering with hesitation. "You can answer it," she said. "I'm in the middle of something." Something being a rerun she'd watched at least 3 times. I picked up the phone. "Hello?" There was a brief pause. "Ellie?" Daniel's voice came through, surprised but not displeased. "I didn't know you were there." I almost laughed. "I've been here for 7 years," I wanted to say. "Yes," I replied. "I'm here." Another pause. Then, "Is Mom okay?" "She's fine," I said. "She's right here, actually." No, I mean overall, health-wise." I looked at my mother, who was pretending very hard not to listen. "She's had better days," I said, "but she's stable." "Good," he said. "Good." The conversation could have ended there, polite, surface level, but something in me, some long, silent part, decided I was done swallowing things. "I spoke to a lawyer," I said. The line went quiet. "About the house," I added. Another pause, longer this time. "Well," he said slowly, "I hope they explained everything clearly." "They explained that you own it now, that Mom signed it over last month." "Yes," he said, "that's correct." "And you didn't think to mention it to me?" There it was, the sigh, the one he used when he thought someone was being unreasonable. "Ellie," he said, "this wasn't done to hurt you. It's just practical." "Practical for who?" I asked. "For Mom and for me. Someone has to make sure things are handled properly when the time comes." "And I'm not capable of that?" I asked. "That's not what I said." "It's what you implied," I said. "I've been handling things for years." "And no one's taking that away from you,"
he said smoothly. You can stay there as long as Mom wants you to. I felt a chill. As long as Mom wants me to? Yes, it's still her home while she's alive. And after? I asked. He hesitated just a fraction of a second, but I heard it. Well, he said, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. I closed my eyes. So you're telling me that I'm taking care of Mom in a house I don't own, paying bills for a property that's in your name with no security of my own? That's not fair, he said. No, it's not. When the call ended, my hands were shaking. My mother hadn't said a word during the entire conversation. She sat there, staring at the television, the light flickering across her face. Mom, I said quietly, did you know he wasn't going to include me? She didn't turn around. I didn't want to get into details. You didn't want to, or you didn't care. That made her flinch. I raised you both, she said defensively. I love you both. Love isn't the same as fairness, I said. She stood up then, her movements stiff. I'm tired. We'll talk later. But later never really came. Days turned into weeks. The tension became a low hum under everything we did. And with each passing day, my resentment grew, not loud or explosive, but quiet and corrosive. I began to notice things I'd ignored before, how my mother always framed Daniel's absence as sacrifice, while my presence was treated as obligation, how she praised his financial success but dismissed my stability as lack of ambition, how every decision about the future seemed to orbit around him, even though he wasn't the one here, wiping counters and setting alarms for medication. I started documenting things, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. I kept records of the bills I paid, the repairs I funded, the hours I took off work to care for her. I didn't know what I'd need them for, only that I needed proof of my contribution, of my role, because suddenly I felt like I might need to justify my existence in a family I'd quietly held together. The breaking point came one afternoon when Daniel showed up unannounced. I heard his car before I saw him, the low hum of an engine I didn't recognize pulling into the driveway. My mother's face lit up when she heard it, her fatigue momentarily forgotten. "Danny's here," she said, already pushing herself out of the chair. He walked in with a smile, carrying a bag of pastries from some fancy bakery I'd never been to. He hugged my mother, kissed her cheek, and then turned to me. "Hey," he said, like we were old co-workers running into each other by chance. "Hey," I replied. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd balanced checkbooks and traced old scratches, and he began talking about renovations. I was thinking, he sipped his coffee, it might be time to update the kitchen, increase the value of the house. The house? I've already paid for a new roof and the furnace. Yes, he said, nodding, and that was generous of you. Generous. Like a donation, not an investment, not a contribution. I think, he continued, it would be best if we started thinking of this as more of a temporary arrangement for you. My mother stared into her cup. My chest tightened. Temporary how? Well, he said carefully, you're not getting any younger. Maybe it's time to think about what you want next. I looked at my mother. Is that what you want? She didn't answer. And in that silence, something in me finally broke, not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. I want honesty, and I want respect. Neither of them spoke, so I did the one thing I'd avoided for years. I stopped protecting their comfort at the expense of my own. That night, I packed a small overnight bag. Not because I planned to leave forever, but because I needed space to hear my own thoughts without theirs pressing in on me. The house had become a place where every room held an expectation I could no longer meet. My mother watched from the doorway as I zipped the bag. "You're being dramatic," she said softly, like she was trying to soothe a child. I paused, my hand resting on the zipper. "I'm being honest." She crossed her arms. "You're punishing me." "No," I said. "I'm protecting myself." She looked away, and for the first time since I'd moved back, I didn't follow her gaze. I didn't try to fix it. I stayed that night with my daughter, Claire. She didn't ask many questions, just handed me a mug of tea and let me sit in silence on her couch. That kindness cracked something open in me, and I cried quietly while she rubbed my back like she used to when she was little. The next morning, clarity arrived the way it sometimes does, slowly but firmly. I wasn't going to yell, I wasn't going to beg, and I wasn't going to martyr myself anymore. If my mother and brother had made decisions without me, then I would make my own, with full awareness of the truth. I scheduled a meeting with an elder law attorney. Sitting in that small, tidy office, surrounded by framed degrees and neutral art, I told my story from the beginning: the caregiving, the bills, the transfer, the quiet erasure. The attorney listened without interruption, nodding occasionally, her expression thoughtful. "You have a few options," she said when I finished. "None of them are simple, but you are not without standing." She explained concepts I'd never needed to understand before: constructive trust, caregiver agreements, unjust enrichment, legal terms for moral wrongs. "You may not own the house," she said, "but you've invested significantly in its maintenance and your mother's care. That matters." It did something to me hearing that from a stranger, that my time mattered, that my sacrifices weren't invisible. When I returned to the house later that day, Daniel was still there. He'd stayed overnight, sleeping in his old room like he hadn't been gone for decades. We sat at the kitchen table again, always the kitchen table. "I spoke to a lawyer," I said, looking at both of them. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "About my rights," I replied. My mother stiffened. "Ellie, please." "I'm not attacking anyone," I said calmly, "but I'm done pretending this arrangement is fair." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "This is getting out of hand." "No," I said, "it's finally in hand." I explained what the attorney had told me, not as a threat, but as a boundary. "I'm willing to continue caring for Mom, but not without a formal agreement, compensation, security, something that acknowledges what I'm giving." My mother looked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. "You want to be paid?" she asked, hurt lacing her voice. "I want to be respected," I said, "and I want to be safe." Daniel scoffed. "So this is about money." "It's about balance," I replied. "You have ownership, I have labor, and right now only one of those is being valued." He shook his head. "Mom didn't raise us to nickel and dime family." "No," I said. "She raised me to give without question, and I did, for years." Silence fell. My mother's eyes filled with tears. "I never meant for it to turn into this." "I know," I said softly, "but intent doesn't erase impact." For the first time, she looked truly uncertain. Daniel stood up. "I think we all need to cool off," he said. "This conversation isn't productive." "I disagree. It's just uncomfortable." He left shortly after, slamming the door harder than necessary. The house vibrated with the sound, then settled into a stillness that felt different than before. My mother sat across from me, her hands folded in her lap. "I was afraid," she said quietly. "Of what?" I asked. "Of being alone, of making the wrong choice. Danny made it sound so simple. He said he'd take care of things." "And where did that leave me?" I asked. She swallowed. "I didn't think you'd ever leave." There it was, the truth I'd danced around for years. She hadn't chosen Daniel because she trusted him more. She'd chosen him because she assumed I would stay no matter what. That realization hurt, but it also freed me. I can't be your safety net if I don't have one myself. She nodded slowly, like someone finally understanding the weight of a long sentence. We agreed to talk again after Daniel returned home, to explore options, to do things properly. But even as she spoke of compromise, I knew something fundamental had changed. I began looking for apartments, quietly, without drama. I toured small places with good light and thin walls, places that felt like possibility rather than obligation. Each one felt like a betrayal and a relief all at once. When I told my mother I might move out, she cried. "I don't know how I'll manage." I replied, "You'll manage. You always have." And so had I. The day I signed a lease, my hands shook, not from fear, but from the unfamiliar sensation of choosing myself. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know how my brother would react or whether my mother would ever fully understand. But I knew this. I was done shrinking to fit into a story that didn't include me. And that was the beginning of something else.
The truth has a way of traveling faster than you expect. I hadn't told many people about what was happening, not out of shame, but because I was still trying to understand it myself. But families have their own underground currents, and once something shifts, everyone seems to feel it. My aunt called first. She left a voicemail while I was at work, her voice tight with concern. "Ellie, honey, your mother mentioned you might be moving out. Is everything all right?" I listened to that message 3 times before calling her back. We met for coffee at a small diner near the office, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and a smell of burnt toast that never quite goes away. She listened as I spoke, her spoon resting untouched in her cup. "She signed the house over to Daniel," I said, "without telling me." My aunt's eyebrows shot up. "She did what?" "And now he's talking about renovations," I added, a bitter edge creeping into my voice, "like I'm just temporary help." My aunt leaned back, shaking her head slowly. "Your mother always favored him," she said, "but I never thought she'd go this far." Hearing someone else say it out loud was strangely validating. Within days, cousins started calling. Neighbors stopped me in the grocery store to ask if I was doing okay. Daniel's wife sent a carefully worded text asking if everything was settled now. Nothing was settled. The house itself seemed to sense the tension. My mother moved more slowly, her energy drained. I helped where I could, but I no longer rearranged my entire schedule to accommodate her needs. I had begun setting limits, leaving for my apartment in the evenings, letting calls go to voicemail if they came too late. Daniel noticed. He called me one afternoon, his tone clipped. "Mom says you're not around as much." "I have my own place now," I said. "That tends to happen." "This isn't what we discussed," he said. "No," I replied. "This is what I decided." He sighed. "You're putting her in a difficult position." She put herself there with your help." The tension between us escalated quietly, like a storm building without thunder. He began making changes without consulting me, hiring a lawn service, scheduling contractors to assess the house. Each decision felt like another erasure. Then came the family gathering. It was my cousin's birthday, a small get-together at her home. I debated not going, but something told me hiding would only make things worse. Daniel was there when I arrived, standing near the kitchen island, laughing easily. When he saw me, his smile faltered just slightly. My mother sat on the couch, surrounded by relatives. She looked smaller than usual, her hands folded neatly in her lap. As the evening wore on, conversations drifted, wine glasses refilled, and then, inevitably, the topic turned to the house.
I heard you signed it over to Danny, my uncle said, his tone casual. My mother stiffened. It just made sense, she said. He knows about these things. I felt the room go quiet. And Ellie? My uncle asked. What about her? All eyes turned to me. I took a breath. I've been caring for Mom and paying the bills for years, I said evenly. I wasn't included in the decision. Murmurs rippled through the room. Daniel stepped in quickly. Ellie's exaggerating, he said. She chose to help. I looked at him. I chose to love. There's a difference. The room stayed silent. My aunt spoke up then. Ellie gave up a lot, she said. We all know that. Daniel's face flushed. This isn't the place for this, he snapped. No, I said, but it's the truth. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I just spoke plainly, calmly, letting years of quiet sacrifice stand on their own. That night, after everyone left, my mother called me. Her voice was small. I didn't realize people would react like that. I didn't realize either, but maybe they should have known. The next day, Daniel called again. This time, his tone was different, strained. We need to talk, he said. We met at the house. He paced the living room while I sat on the edge of the couch. You embarrassed me, he said. I told the truth, I replied. He ran a hand through his hair. People are questioning Mom's judgment. They're questioning fairness, I said. He stopped pacing. What do you want? It was the first time he'd asked that. I want acknowledgement, I said, and I want protection. He scoffed. You want the house. No, I want what's right. I explained again, slowly, carefully, what I was asking for. A caregiver agreement, reimbursement, a guarantee that my years of labor wouldn't be erased. He listened this time, really listened. I didn't think it mattered, he admitted quietly. You were always there. That's exactly why it mattered, I said. Something shifted then, not enough to heal everything, but enough to open a door. He agreed to speak to a lawyer, to revisit the arrangement. My mother, caught between us, finally said something she'd never said before. I'm sorry, she whispered. I took you for granted. The words were late, but they were real. In the weeks that followed, paperwork was drawn up. Not perfect, not equal, but better. I was compensated for caregiving, my financial contributions were acknowledged, and there was a clause, small but meaningful, that guaranteed me time and notice if the house ever changed hands. It wasn't justice in the grand sense, but it was recognition, and sometimes that's the beginning of healing. The paperwork didn't fix everything. It sat in a manila folder on my kitchen counter for weeks before I even opened it again, like a quiet truce neither side fully trusted. I'd won recognition on paper, but the deeper wounds, the ones that didn't have legal language, were still tender. My mother moved differently around me now, softer, careful, as if afraid one wrong word might send me packing for good. It was strange to be treated with that kind of consideration after years of being assumed. Daniel, on the other hand, became distant. He followed through on the agreement, to his credit. The checks arrived on time. He stopped talking about renovations, but our conversations became brief and transactional, stripped of any warmth they might once have pretended to have. I wasn't surprised. When someone benefits from your silence, they rarely thank you for finding your voice. I split my time between my apartment and my mother's house. I still helped, but on my terms. Set hours, clear expectations, no more late-night guilt calls, no more rearranging my life to accommodate decisions I wasn't part of. At first, the quiet felt wrong. Then it felt peaceful. My apartment slowly began to feel like mine. I bought a small plant that needed very little attention. I cooked meals just for myself, learning again what I liked without having to consider someone else's preferences. I slept through the night for the first time in years. One afternoon, as I was folding laundry in my own living room, my mother called. I fell, she said. My heart jumped. Are you hurt? No, she said quickly. Just shaken. I'm fine. I drove over anyway. She was sitting on the couch when I arrived, a blanket over her knees. The house smelled like the lemon cleaner she'd always used, the scent pulling memories from deep inside me. I tried to reach Danny first. He didn't answer. I didn't comment. I just checked her over, made sure she was steady, brewed her some tea. After a while, she spoke again. I didn't realize how much you did, she said, until you stopped doing it all. I sat across from her, my hands wrapped around my mug. I didn't stop caring. I stopped disappearing. She nodded slowly. I see that now. That conversation didn't erase the past, but it reframed it. For the first time, my mother wasn't defending her choices or minimizing my pain. She was just listening. As months passed, something unexpected happened. My resentment softened. Not because what happened was okay, but because I no longer needed it to protect me. I had boundaries now, a life that didn't depend on being chosen last. Daniel visited less often. When he did, there was an awkward politeness between us. But once, as we stood in the driveway after a visit, he said something I didn't expect. "You were right," he said, staring at the ground. "I took you for granted." I looked at him, surprised. "Why now?" He shrugged. "Because I'm realizing how much I don't know how to do." He gestured toward the house. "The day-to-day stuff, the emotional stuff." I nodded. "It's invisible work until it's gone." He didn't argue. That didn't make us close, but it made us honest. My mother's health declined slowly, the way it often does. No dramatic turn, just a series of small losses. She needed more help again, and this time the help was shared. A home aide came twice a week. Daniel handled paperwork. I handled care, but with support. And through it all, something in me remained steady. When my mother eventually passed, it was quiet. I was there, holding her hand, listening to her breathing slow. In those final moments, she squeezed my fingers weakly. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. I believed her. The aftermath, the funeral, the paperwork, the clearing out of the house, was hard, but not devastating. I grieved without bitterness. I mourned without regret. The house sold months later. I wasn't fighting for it anymore. My life wasn't tied to walls or deeds. I took my portion, the agreed-upon share, and used it to pay off debts I had carried silently for years. I took a small trip alone. I rested. And in that rest, I understood something that had taken me decades to learn. Sacrifice without boundaries isn't love, it's self-erasure. Loving your family shouldn't require you to disappear in the margins of their lives. Caregiving shouldn't mean forfeiting your future. And loyalty should never be misunderstood as obligation. Today, my life is quieter. I work less. I laugh more. I choose myself without guilt. And when I think back to that voicemail, the one that started it all, I no longer feel the sting I once did. I feel gratitude, because it forced me to see the truth. And once you see the truth, you can finally decide what to do with it. There's a moment in every family story when the truth stops being theoretical and becomes personal. For me, it was a voicemail left on an ordinary afternoon, proof that love, when mixed with silence and assumptions, can quietly turn into something that hurts. For a long time, I believed that being the reliable one was my role, that showing up without complaint made me indispensable. But what I learned, slowly, painfully, is that being needed is not the same as being valued. If you're listening to this and recognizing pieces of your own life in mine, I want you to hear this clearly. Your care has worth. Your time has weight, and your presence should never be treated as a given just because you've always been there. Families don't always mean to be unfair. Sometimes they simply lean hardest on the person who bends the most. And if you never straighten up, they may never notice the cost. I didn't walk away angry. I didn't demand revenge. I chose honesty, boundaries, and dignity, and in doing so, I found something better than vindication. I found myself again. So I want to ask you, gently, honestly, if the roles were reversed, what would you have done? Would you have stayed silent to keep the peace or spoken up to protect your future? If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters here. And if you've ever carried more than your share in the name of family, know that you're not alone. Thank you for listening, and if these stories resonate with you, please consider subscribing and supporting the channel so more truths like this can be told, one quiet voice at a time. Subscribe Voice of Legends for more.